My favorite time to use intercropping to maximize my growing space is in early spring. Planted along this drip irrigation line, I have some eggplants, and on either side of them I have a row of lettuce growing. If you'll notice, I have my summer crops planted on my drip irrigation lines and my early spring crops planted between them. Planted on my next two lines, I have some pepper plants, and between those I have a row of spinach. Beyond the far row of peppers and a row of carrots, I have a row of radishes planted. My drip irrigation lines are set 3 feet apart, so the early spring crops are about 18 inches from our summer crops. They might look a little crowded, but as you can see, they're doing very well. Then, just as the summer crops need more room and space, the spring crops are finished. In this video, I'm using the term intercropping, but in many cases, companion planting might be more appropriate. Probably the most well-known example of companion planting is the Three Sisters garden, and that's planting corn, beans, and squash together. Here I have a good stand of corn, and planted in amongst the corn are some pole beans, and as you can see, they're climbing the corn. It gives them a good place to climb. And the beans produce nitrogen, which the corn can utilize. Then behind the corn we have some squash growing, and the squash spreads out on the ground and helps keep as many weeds from growing, and it also gets shaded a little bit by the corn. Onions are sometimes intercropped with eggplant, and I have some onions here that are a little closer than recommended to the eggplant. Basil can be intercropped with lots of different things, and here we have some basil planted between our eggplants. And the nice thing about basil is there are lots of different varieties, and each variety tastes a little bit different. If you check those companion planting charts all over the internet, you'll notice that eggplants and peppers also make good companions. But did you know that companion planting is a myth? I'll talk more about that later in the video. You might have noticed already that I also have basil planted between our pepper plants. Some varieties of basil can grow pretty aggressively, so you might have to do more pruning to keep them from crowding each other. Over next to the tomatoes, I'm intercropping carrots. Carrots are another crop that will be finished long before the tomatoes are. Each year around the edges of the garden, I usually intercrop some flowers, and right here you see some marigold flowers that haven't bloomed yet. But the marigold flowers are good for nematodes, and they also provide a little bit of color to the garden. How well marigolds work for nematodes depends on what site you read. There's some disagreement about the subject. Along with the marigolds, I plant zinnias and other flowers also, and they help attract pollinators, which can actually give you better production in your garden. As well as attracting pollinators to pollinate your vegetables, it's kind of entertaining to watch the various bees and butterflies go from flower to flower. I like to grow things in straw bales, and in this straw bale we're intercropping a pepper plant with some eggplants. Onions can be intercropped with a variety of plants, and here I have onions planted between my rows of tomatoes. As I mentioned before, basil is a popular plant for intercropping, and I have some here that came up in my row of onions. Two popular plants to intercrop with each other are basil and tomatoes, and here I have some basil growing next to our tomato cages. Many sites will say that when planted together, basil and tomatoes will improve the taste of each other, but I think that is probably a myth. I do know that they go very well together in the kitchen. In this straw bale, we have another example of growing eggplants with pepper plants. In this bale, there are 2 eggplants with a pepper plant grown in between. And I can't say that the plants benefit from each other, but I do know that they don't harm each other because the eggplants did very well. and so did the pepper plant. You might be a little new to gardening, and maybe you've heard a little bit about companion planting, but you hadn't heard that it was a myth. If that's the case, I would encourage you to do a Google search and search the term companion planting myth. If you do that search, you're more than likely going to run across some information written by Dr. Linda Chalker Scott. According to her, rather than use the term companion planting, a more appropriate term would be intercropping or plant associations. According to Dr. Chalker Scott, those companion planting charts that you see all over the internet should be considered to have entertainment value but not scientific value. She's written specifically about companion planting as a myth, but also horticultural myths in general. And for those of you who have been gardening for quite a while and use companion planting as part of your gardening strategy and wasn't aware that it was considered to be a myth, I would say if whatever you're doing is working for you, I wouldn't change. Let me know if you use intercropping in your garden, and if you're just now finding this channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. We'll see you next time.